Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor.
Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send a message to others that they are not alone.
Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, and find some research information about PTSD. And if you can, look good while supporting Cracked Armor by buying some gear.
(10-9). Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 39 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. Life's been busy lately, like super busy. I am finished my first course in my master's program for counseling psychology. I did really good. I did really good. I ended up with a 91% in a master's course. Hey, haven't been to university in 27 years, and learning is significantly different now than it was then. So I'm pretty proud of that. But, as my mom would say, where did the other 9% go? There's room for improvement. Things have been quite busy. The ups and the downs. I really dislike coming on the podcast here and talking about, well, shitastic shit. You know, just shitty, shitastic shit. And the reality is that sometimes I guess I have to, because otherwise I'm hiding it. And hiding it is kind of what got me in this place where I am now. It was, all those years of hiding traumatic experiences, of hiding sanctuary trauma, of hiding moral trauma. That's ultimately what got me here, because I wasn't just hiding it from other people. I was hiding it from myself. I mean, I was putting it in a box and storing it away because I did not want to deal with it. I did not know how to deal with it. And as such, I thought it was best not to deal with it. Of course, that's not smart. Again, that's just what got me to where I am today. As such, I have to still remember I can't just shove shit away. I have to think about it, I have to process it, and I have to discuss it. One of the things that I'll discuss today is, and I know I've mentioned this before, but when I stepped back from work, I thought I was going to be off for a few weeks, like at most a few weeks. Now today, as I record this introduction for episode 39, I am just a few weeks from being off an entire year. That is terrifying to me in a number of ways. It's terrifying primarily because I had no idea it was going to take me this long to untangle the mess that has gone on in my brain. And I know that it's still not completely untangled. There's still lots there to deal with. I'm not really sure why that's surprising. It just seems to be. Maybe that's just our kind of concept or kind of ideology that although it's taken us a long time to get to a shitty place, our resiliency is going to save us. We have been saved by resiliency up to this point, and our resiliency will push us through to the other side of healing. As such, though it may have taken 2 decades to get this ill, I believe it's going to take a matter of weeks to get better. No. I mean, it's kind of like, that concept of, let's just, use a metaphor of gaining weight. And if I've used this before, I'm sorry. I'm using it again. We can take 6 months, let's just say, to gain weight. And all of a sudden, at the end of 6 months, we step on the scale again and we go, holy shit, where the fuck did that 15 pounds come from? What's going on? Whoa. And then, so what do we do? Of course we diet. Yeah, we're going to diet. We're going to exercise. We're going to just lose this fucking weight. Man, I got to deal with this. And yet we become, well, I shouldn't maybe paint everyone with the same brush. Although, when you start looking at the realities of people trying to take these magic pills to make the weight just go away with a snap, I think we're pretty much all guilty of failing to accept the reality that it took us 6 months to gain the 15 pounds. And as such, it is not going to take us 6 days to lose it. This sucks. I know it does. It's the reality, though. And this is akin to my mental health struggle with regards to where I am now and why it's taken me so long to get here. And I'm still not finished. So I wonder about going back to work. Am I going to be going back to work? I mean, if I'm asked to go back to work, if I'm given the opportunity to go back to work, I am 100% going back to work. Absolutely. Do I think that's necessarily the best thing for me? Probably not. But I'm fine, and I know I can do the job. I know I can push through the job, and I will continue working on where I am now and where I want to be in the future. I'm also absolutely fucking stubborn, absolutely hard-headed, very resilient to push forward, just complete type A. I just want to take life right by the scrotum and squeeze. But I guess time will tell if that's going to happen or not. And I don't like that. I really don't like that because I want to go back. I want to complete my service. No, hold on. When I say I want to go back, don't think that I am dying to go back to being a cop. No, I'm not. I am not dying to go back to being a police officer. It's taken its toll on me. I've done my service. I've given a fuck ton to my community and to my country. And so I'm not genuinely excited to go back and do that. I am, however, genuinely excited about the opportunity to finish my service. And although it's just a number, I realize it's just a number, but I would like to complete 25. I would like to go out on my terms, not on someone else's. I would like the opportunity to work with my team again, my team here in Atlanta, Canada. The team I have in a management position, an upper management position, no, zero desire. Zero. But I do want to work with my team here. And there are fantastic members outside of my team in this division and in other divisions with whom I want the opportunity to continue working. Anyways, I don't want to make this any longer than it is right now. I sort of just wanted to give an update. School's going well. I'm on my second course right now. I'm still trying to work through my shit. And I have had some really fucking shitty days the past few weeks, months. But I've also had some good ones in there too, and it's all part of growing. So I don't look at those shitty days as a complete and utter burden, as a complete and utter waste, as a complete and utter empathetic shit show. No, it's all learning. It's all learning, and it's all realizing different parts of myself and the environment and trying to always obtain some sort of knowledge from it and betterment of who I am and who I want to be. I'm going to end off with an email I received. It says, "Hi, Larry. Firstly, thank you so much for your amazing podcast. I'm an Australian intensive care paramedic with 15 years service, and prior to that was in the Army for 5 years. I am currently off work on PTSD, and your podcast has been the most effective tool to understand what I'm going through, as it has been horrendous, and to now retool and pick myself back up off the floor. Being able to identify with people in similar industries is a game changer." I really appreciate the email. Thank you so much. I'm also going to add the last part of this email here because this is something you all potentially could respond to. This individual asked, "I just wondered, do you have any online chat groups with other service people you could recommend, or people willing to chat directly about this?" So if you're looking for someone with whom to chat, if you're looking to start an online group where people from different countries around the world can meet to talk about these things, let me know. I will pass along this individual's contact information, and you guys can set up perhaps some sort of a group online to discuss shit and to help each other through shit. Let's take a quick break. Did you know there is now a Papa Tango Sierra Delta online store? It recently opened, and you can now purchase Papa Tango Sierra Delta challenge coins and PVC patches. Order your challenge coin and patch before they are all sold out, and show everyone that you are ready to stand up, speak out, and be heard. We are back from the break. Thank you very much for staying tuned to the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by retired RCMP officer and the host of the fantastic podcast called 1033, Nathan Kapler. Good day, sir.
Thank you for having me, Larry. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm looking forward to this, Nathan, and I have been for a while because you had me as a guest on your show to talk about my journey. And so I am very much looking forward to asking you to introduce yourself and to tell us about your journey.
Yeah, Nathan Kapler, my journey. I'll start with the present moment. So if I was to introduce myself, I'm a father, married, and I have 3 children who are quite young, so we're balancing that out. And I retired from the RCMP about 2 years ago. And I had 14 years with the RCMP. Had a great career with them, however, fell down quite hard with post-traumatic stress and a whole bunch of other issues and symptoms. And I think at the time, I didn't really realize how big of an issue it was that I was facing or how to properly convey or talk about it. So it wasn't until, though, actually after I retired that I started to really dive into what is PTSD, what does my PTSD look like, and how do I start finally talking about this stuff? Because so much of it, I was riddled with so much shame and guilt from my own experiences that I really had lost my voice for a number of years. And it wasn't until retirement where I finally started to learn how to talk about this stuff and had launched my own podcast where I talk openly about what my journey looks like and invite others to come on and share their story, where a lot of the healing that I needed to have in my life really finally started to take place. So what started out as kind of an adventure into the abyss of, where is this all going to take me? It's been one of the best things I've done for myself in my life.
That's fantastic, man. That is fantastic. And it's a great podcast. You started when, Nathan?
I started truth be told, I started in 2021, just after recognizing that I needed to embrace this thing called sobriety. That was my own personal journey and my own decision that I made. And I did battle addiction for a while, but it was in about 2021 where I actually started talking on TikTok, of all places, just as we were kind of coming out of the social isolation pandemic, also known as COVID. And about a year later, I started to amass quite a following, and everyone was kind of, we want your stuff, but we want it on the go. We don't want this live version stuff because a lot of people were missing, the work I was doing. So I started podcasting about a year later in 2022, and here we are.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I can see that exact same thing. So, I mean, I got into doing live shows with just, again, beer kind of things, brewing and stuff like that. And it's the same reality as people don't always have the time to sit down. So the podcasting, to take it with you, to play it in the car when you have extra time, to be able to do it when you're doing housework or outdoor work or whatever. Yeah, man, it works. And the 1033 podcast is, well, it's an amazing, amazing show. I can't say enough about it, and it was an honor to be there. Nathan, I guess, can we go back through your RCMP days and tell us about that and what led you to doing the podcast? Yeah,
for sure. So I won't dive too deep into my story because I've talked about it so much on the podcast. And if you really want to catch kind of the depth of where I go with my story, head on over and check it out. But for the people, that are kind of on your side of the fence that are listening to your amazing podcast, my journey started, I was a very young man when I got into the Mountie. So I was about 21. And while I kind of knew what I was getting into, I also didn't know what I was getting into. I think I had this idea that policing was going to be something much different. And whether that was a thought of delusion, I'll never really know. But what it ended up happening to be policing was something that was almost kind of this front row seat to, everyone calls it the greatest show on earth, which it is, but it's also the greatest show on earth, where you come across kind of just this level of pain and suffering that you really don't expect. And for me, I didn't really know how to deal with a lot of the trauma that I was experiencing as a young man, as a police officer. And I didn't really know how to talk about some of the emotions that I was experiencing as well, along with the trauma. So what I will say about, different police organizations is they do a fantastic job of training us and getting us ready to be on the street and deal with all of these complex issues and find solutions very quick and keep us, alive. However, what we weren't doing back in those days in 2007 is we really weren't training our people to be vulnerable and open and authentic and talk about the trauma that we were going through. So I still went through this generation, probably much like yourself, Larry, where, we were well trained to deal with trauma, but we were not well trained to go home and process this trauma when we were at home. And for me, I really struggled with that for a number of years. And it's not like I put blame on the RCMP for not having the right tools or processes in place. They definitely didn't at the time, but we also weren't really engaged like we are now with this whole mental health thing. And so there's been significant strides forward for the RCMP and for other, police organizations. But unfortunately for us, when we went through, we just kind of were still piecing this whole thing together. So I would say obviously the organization could have done better, absolutely. But I too also needed to learn a lot, even about myself, going back to those days. And some of the more simple things that I didn't recognize was, I really struggled with stepping forward and having that piece of vulnerability and being able to talk about my trauma and really kind of open up, what I was going through emotionally in my new career, right? There was just so many things that had happened. I had left Alberta and went to BC, and I went through a significant breakup. And in that time, I had felt I had lost my support structure. And so many of our stories are built off of that first kind of crucial step going into the Mounties of we get hired and then we go somewhere and we get removed from our support system or our support structure, right? Our families, our loved ones. Some of us might go through a bit of a heartbreak, breakup or something like that. And we stay strong and we forge on. But what we're also doing is we're not dealing with some of those harder emotions of now we're facing, social isolation, we're having a bit of identity issue or crisis as we're trying to blend into this new world of being a cop. And it all kind of started from there. And then also going to work and seeing some of the most significant trauma that you can see as a police officer. So for me, I think going back to those initial days, I didn't recognize the impact that the trauma was having on me in the moment. I thought I was strong enough to get through it, and I didn't believe that it was going to have an impact on my mental health. But in reality, it's not a matter of strength. It's just you see abnormal things and they impact you. And we need to get better at opening up and having conversation and communicating about these things that we see and we go through, because they are going to impact you. No matter how strong or resilient you are, if you go to enough of these things, they're going to change you. It's just how it goes. And we need to get better at accepting and not denying that the job will change us. So for me, I was fortunate enough to know that early on in my process of being a Mountie in about 2009, shortly after I had joined the Mounties, I think one of the big major things that I started to really notice was that the level of my optimism was starting to change. It was starting to kind of be quelched or kind of tuned down. And then the other thing that I was also experiencing too is I actually had stopped dreaming at one point. And I remember it was a very kind of dark void within that seemed to be growing. And I couldn't explain it, but I reached out to a psychologist. And at the time, you didn't really talk openly about even stepping out from
awesome.
work to talk to a psychologist about this stuff.
Yeah.
But I had, and I remember I stepped forward and I said, hey, I'm not too sure what's going on right now with me, but I've been to some pretty significant things. I think I'm handling them well, but I'm starting to notice that my optimism's changing. I'm getting a little bit more grumpy and irritable. I'm getting shorter with people. I've stopped dreaming. I don't feel like I'm sleeping as well anymore. What does all this mean? And at the time, too, I don't know why this was told to me the way it was, but a psychologist at the time told me, you know what, you just need to kind of try to focus on having better work-life balance. Just continue to try to stay positive, and we'll do a little bit of work. I think we did some EMDR, and we tried to deal with the body a little bit and some of the stress I obviously was carrying. Did it help? I'm sure. And the psychologists have to be careful too. They don't want to lead you down the path of saying, oh, you have PTSD, or this is the starting of it, right? So I'm sure he tried to do his best, given, where I was even at. And I also had a really hard time explaining where I was at, because back then we didn't have any knowledge about how to talk about this stuff. So how do you even begin to talk about something that you're going through? So complicated, right? And I'm sure you can relate to that too.
That's like just your ability to identify some issues that were going on and have the courage to go talk about it. Brother, that's honorable. I mean, we're not talking 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We're talking 2009. I mean, that we still weren't doing anything with regards to Road to Mental Readiness or anything like that. I just have to pay credit that was absolutely amazing.
No, I appreciate that. And I remember back in those days, any conversation about mental health was not had anywhere in the office, right? And it was definitely seen as, if you talked about your mental health, it was seen as a sign of weakness, and most likely it would impact your career negatively. So, I didn't agree with that, obviously, because I was looking around, I was seeing other people floundering, right? They were starting to see their own struggles, and you could see the changes in others, and I could see the change in myself. And I was like, surely I'm not alone, but you can't talk about this stuff in any capacity with anyone else because you're so fearful that it's going to be a red stain on your career. So you just try to quietly go get help where you can. And that also ends up negatively impacting, any kind of chance of success that you're going to have in your own journey, right? Because you're now shrouded in secrecy and mystery, and you're not able to get this stuff openly. And, I've learned so much about a lot of healing happens when you finally are able to deal with that shame and guilt of what you've been through. These are all very normal things to go through as a police officer. So I appreciate, you taking that moment to talk about what this looked like in 2009, 2007. It was absolutely brutal for us. I do think it's better, but as my journey continued beyond 2009, I think I was feeling quite burnt out. After 4 years of general duty policing, I'd been to enough traumatic calls, and I was really starting to see after 4 years that there was a significant change within me. The level of compassion that I had definitely faded to a point where there was compassion burnout, and I didn't really care anymore about people. At certain points in my career, I didn't even care about my own safety. Like, I had almost become kind of reckless in a way where, if I was about to get into a fight or someone had threatened to punch me, I would just say, go for it. But better make sure that you knock me out, because if you don't, I'll be the one knocking you out. And, it's not until later where you look at those moments and you go, holy crap, like, what am I doing? Like, you're almost playing chicken, right? And you're calling someone out. And that's not good either, right? Like, we're supposed to try and stay healthy and safe. And if you're at that point, it just really expresses kind of that dark path that you're now starting to walk, where you really don't care as much about your personal safety. And you're willing to, kind of give up more of that because you're quite numb or disconnected, and the trauma is really starting to take a hold of you.
Absolutely.
Right. Fast forward out to 2014, I had left uniform policing believing that it would give me a bit of a break, which it did. But I also struggled too with kind of slowing down in a plain clothes unit. Now, kind of that hypervigilance was still there. And I still struggled with moving a little bit slower and maybe being grounded, and the trauma had definitely taken root into the body, and was definitely causing some concerns even beyond that 4 years. Now, my journey, as it continues out to 2014, 2014 was when I was finally diagnosed with PTSD. And I remember for those 5 years, I was still going to psychologists and still trying to figure out, what's going on. And the symptoms were getting worse. And I was getting worse too over that time. The level of social isolation that was happening was increasing, and I was getting almost paranoid or fearful to step out of my house at certain points, just due to things that I had experienced as a cop, like getting swarmed one night in Whistler and almost killed. I didn't want to go to a grocery store where there was a lot of people because I was fearful. The body didn't feel safe around people anymore. So I would naturally either not go out for groceries and order stuff in from Amazon, or, go to a grocery store when it's quite late at night, so there was less people there, right? These are all avoidant type of behaviors that eventually lead to this thing called PTSD. So I think it was about 2014, Larry, in November, where I finally walked into maybe my third or fourth psychologist's office and finally said, listen, I've been talking about this thing that's been brewing now for, the better part of 5 years. And at first, I really didn't understand it. I kind of see it a little bit more clearly now. And I have a little bit better education behind me to kind of maybe know what this is. And I had done some online tests at home and just walked in and said, listen, you guys haven't been able to diagnose or tell me kind of what's going on. But from my perspective, I have post-traumatic stress and I'm not doing well.
Wow.
And Larry, the psychologist, said, we're going to do a quick test. He did the test and he confirmed it and said, you do have post-traumatic stress. It's quite severe. And oddly enough, that news, when I heard that news, it was actually more validating. And I felt more relief to finally know that this was the devil I was dancing with. Because up until that point, I felt so alone and so confused as to what the hell I was going through.
Wow. And so from there then, Nathan, what do you do? How do you take this diagnosis? How do you continue to move on? Do you continue with your therapy? Because you have come to a point when we go from there to now where there has been significant post-traumatic growth. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. But that growth didn't start until much, much later. So after I received the diagnosis, I basically said, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to make sure that, I am moving in the right direction? It was recommended to me in the moment that I take medication, Cipralex, a low dose of antidepressant, to deal with some of the symptoms that obviously were present with the PTSD diagnosis. And I said, yep, I'll take it. I started on that and that helped. But at the same time, when I took it, I also felt very kind of conflicted because it was like this Band-Aid approach. And this is how I felt. I've had this feeling like I'm taking this medication to make sure that some of the symptoms are turned or tuned down to go to work, to continue to be victimized or experience more trauma and environmental issues that are still going to impact my mental health. And it always was kind of something that didn't sit well with me. I did do it because it was recommended for me and it did help. But at the same time, it just was such a confusing place to take medication to continue to go back to this environment, which I knew was causing these issues. So I knew in that moment that I still wasn't probably dealing with the root cause of everything, but it was buying me some time while I figured out where am I in life? Where's my service going? How do I keep this career together? It's so confusing for us to go through this story, and I'm sure so many of us can relate to this. And it wasn't until about 2015 where I came across, I would say, my most toxic leader in the workplace, who also was struggling with post-traumatic stress. And he was much more advanced in his case. He was facing alcoholism. He had narcissistic behavioral patterns, sociopathic behavioral patterns. And he was someone who literally would just target people and go after them. And I'm sure you've worked with these people as well, Larry. They're horrible. They're horrible for the organization. They're horrible for your mental health. And they're horrible for themselves too. Like, this individual truly was sick, period. And I can remember when it came time for, me to be a target of this individual's pain and suffering, it turned on me, and it turned quite aggressively on me. And I'm a very sensitive, very empathetic kind of individual, and I'm very geared towards helping others. And I think that was kind of manipulated to an extent where, I was actually almost a very easy target. And while I tried to stay positive, and I didn't quite understand what this individual was going through at the time, I was the subject to, all of these numerous different harassment and bullying kind of tactics that happen, right? And they happen very, very kind of innocently, and then they grow over time, right? There might be some kind of abuse with the cell phone where you're getting phone calls at night, at 9 o'clock at night about something you don't have to have a phone call about. And that sergeant is hammered out of his mind, calling you and berating you about a file or an email or something just that doesn't need to take place, right? So it started out as just kind of this very kind of almost kind of smaller, innocent thing. And then it eventually grew to a point where this individual was so unwell that he charged me at work in 2015 and tried to, what I thought was attack me. I actually had to put my hand out and brace myself for an attack while at work. And I was with another employee of the RCMP at the time. And it was just the most bizarre thing to go through because now you have to defend yourself and put this person in check and then go back to work with him, right? So, and that's where actually the panic attacks started, Larry. So the panic attacks and the anxiety, along with some of the PTSD issues that were really starting to take root, were, really starting to become a major issue. Now, even though this was happening, I was still, and agreed to go back to 2014, had also jumped on board with going to the operational stress injury clinic. And I had made significant growth within that avenue, had learned how to connect with people and talk about the experience and learn the value of group therapy, and did different modes of therapy, even for myself, to get better. So made these significant strides, but at the same time, it all became unraveled, dealing with this toxic leader. So for me, in 2016, I really started to recognize that the body wasn't handling this stress well anymore. I was having panic attacks daily. I was vomiting daily. I didn't feel safe at work. And I'm not just talking on the street. I'm also talking in the office. I was really struggling with sleep. I'd become an insomniac for about a year and a half, where I was maybe sleeping 15 minutes, 20 minutes a night. And that's just because the body can't calm down. Cyclical thinking was happening. There was probably a level of paranoia built within. We become quite fearful. The amygdala's growing, so we're having these misinterpretations of what reality really is. And we feel threatened from every angle in life, right? So we go into this really horribly dark place with PTSD. So unfortunately, my journey did get to a point where I needed some kind of solution to get better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, in 2016, this was when kind of medical cannabis was starting to take off, 2016, 2017. I went to a doctor and just said, hey, I'm really struggling with PTSD. The medication isn't helping anymore. What do we do? And it was strongly recommended that I try medical cannabis. And it worked great. But therein also is that slippery slope where, the potential for abuse can occur. So as this, medical cannabis was helping me deal with the panic attacks and the vomiting and the sleep and all of these different issues, I still wasn't good at getting out and doing the different therapies of talking and, healing and getting all of this stuff out that we've been through. So while it sure did, give me a bit of a reprieve from some symptoms, it was also creating a much larger issue. And then there was about 2018, where I would say, active addiction probably really became a part of my story, where now I needed cannabis in order to function daily. Yeah. And over that next year or so, I would say I started to recognize that there was a problem and still struggled to reach out and say I have a problem. But in 2019, I finally got to a point where my body just was completely done. I had lost a bunch of muscle mass. Stress had taken its toll. I wasn't eating well properly anymore. My mental health was absolutely horrible. It was in shambles. And I knew that this deep and dark place that I had found in my journey, that I couldn't get out on my own. And I had to learn how to reach out for help. And I had to ask for help because I recognized in that moment that I couldn't do this on my own, Larry.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I finally realized that I had to reach out to the Mounties and ask for help. I sent an email to health services back in about 2019, and I didn't really talk too much about what I was facing, but I just said, hey, I'm not well and I need help and I need to go to rehab and it has to happen soon.
And your response you got, was that an EDIV or in K?
That was in BC in E Division.
Okay.
And I will say the RCMP was very understanding and very empathetic. They didn't ask where I was in the journey. They didn't ask too many questions about what was going on. They just said, yes, we'll get you that support. They're quite used to actually dealing with this. It's actually quite common, oddly enough, once you get through it. And they had teed up a spot for me in Edgewood in August of 2019. And I went to rehab in 2019. I went for 6 weeks. And I learned a lot about my trauma and about my childhood trauma and about all of my experiences and about how I hadn't been handling myself well over the years.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at Papa Tango Sierra Delta Podcast @gmail.com. Cheers.
And we're back.
Yeah, so my journey into rehab was, I have nothing but gratitude for going. It was incredibly hard to put my hand up and say I needed to do this. Absolutely. Cops are not good at asking for help, but that was actually one of the best lessons I learned about, the need to ask for help. It's something in life that we have to do. So when I went to rehab, I learned so much about myself. I learned about where trauma sits in the body and how this stuff all impacts us. I also learned about the different things that we need to do in our life when we go through PTSD and how important it is to have this community and this connection and conversation around, being able to be vulnerable and share what we go through. So I really learned how to talk, and I learned how to feel. And I learned how to put these all together and be able to finally express myself for what I had gone through. And like I had mentioned before, I think a very common theme in our journey with policing is so many of us lose that ability where we've just experienced so much trauma and, sanctuary trauma and moral injuries that we just get to a point where we throw our hands up and we just say, I don't even know how to talk about what I'm experiencing anymore. The pain, my own suffering, my own emotions, what I'm seeing and all of these different things. And we just literally hit a point where we're voiceless. We have no voice left at all. So we literally cannot even advocate for ourselves as to what we need.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the only thing I will add to that is in my personal experience, I did not feel comfortable speaking, certainly with my sergeant. I did not feel comfortable speaking with what was supposed to be my field trainer, and I didn't feel comfortable speaking with other members because they were all senior to me at the time. But the one person I did speak to was a auxiliary constable, and I spoke to him several nights on night shift, and if anything, that actually put me into a position where I felt it was more important to stay quiet because, I don't know, he just didn't seem to take it well, the way he looked at me when I just told him about fears I had, about things that had happened, about what was going through my mind, just seemed to kind of, I don't know, that look in his eyes, Nathan, where it's almost like, I don't know, he kind of looked at me like I was almost crazy. Like, what are you doing? What are you saying? What are you thinking? And I guess it's because, in fairness to him, he just never experienced it before. He never had another member when he was out as an aux with him ever talk like that. And it just wasn't happening. Now we're talking 2002, so a long time ago, but still it was just, no, it's difficult to talk and it's better, but there's a lot of members finding it's still difficult to talk.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I can relate with your story too, where, I found a very small group of people who I could talk to and could be open with. Was there, my trust issues, were they there? Absolutely. It was still really hard for me to step forward and really have an open conversation where I knew that judgment or assumptions or an impact to me in my career wasn't going to take place. I don't think I really ever had that until I retired. And I started actually talking, to this community that's finally saying, enough is enough. We need to finally just accept each other for our story and what we go through and just get it out, because we recognize that sometimes you just need to do that. You just need to get that full piece of whatever that's been held in for so many years. Just get it out and accept that from someone else and listen and be there for them and not have that judgment or that shame or that guilt, and just be there to let them vent. Right? All of our experiences are totally different, but at the same time, we need to check our own shit and be there for others without any of our own biases, without anything, but just be there to fully support that person, to hold space for them, to let them do what they need. Do they need to sit? Do they need to talk? Do they need to cry? Do they need to get angry? Like, you have cops out there that are doing this job for sometimes 20, 30 years, and they haven't talked once to one person and been truly vulnerable or open. And that is a shame. And that is called PTSD. And that is leading a very unhealthy life. And we need to stop that, because it's putting our members in the grave. It's driving them to addiction, and it's driving them to significant mental health issues.
That's exactly where I was. So I speak to that first auxiliary constable. It goes very poorly. And what I learned very quickly is to, keep my shit to myself. And then I go until I hit a little over 20 years before I talk about it. I mean, there's a significant incident that happened. And then all of a sudden I talked, but there was way too much under the rug at that point, Nathan. I mean, there was 20 years of shit that just got put in there. And I, like you, it's funny because I went and I actually said at my first meeting with my psychologist that, well, I know I have PTSD. Now, my idea of what PTSD was is quite different than what I learned it was, but I was at least at the point where I likewise said, no, there's something wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone who does this job has some form of it, has some level of it, because it just fucks everyone up. That's the way it goes. It's the way it happens. But it's 20 years of things that here I am, 2.5 years in, weekly sessions, and we haven't even got to the part where we start doing really, post-traumatic growth things in terms of EMDR and so on and so forth. I'm still unpackaging things that have just sat there for so long. And then as soon as I find I unpackage one or two more, there's all of a sudden the things that were back there that I'd forgotten completely about. Is that something that you found as well, Nathan, when you went through your journey?
Yeah, I really did. And I have so much grace now for myself and for others, because you nailed it. You're talking very loosely about kind of why this is happening. You maybe haven't fully connected the dots yet, but for someone who's just slightly further ahead, and I'm not using that, as an ego thing at all, I went through this at one point, and I really recognized that in moments where I was like, okay, I've been in therapy now for, let's say if I started in 2009, and I remember at certain points of being in like 2016, 2017, 2019, 2020, even up until 2021, and I'm still in therapy, Larry. And I think it's something that we should do for a majority of our lifetime, especially if you've served as a first responder. You just always need a little bit of a touch up. Even though I'm doing awesome now in post-traumatic growth, it's just something that keeps you vulnerable, authentic, and connected the way that we're supposed to be. It's just the pursuit of investing in yourself. But for me, Larry, there were so many moments where I was like just defeated. And I was like, how long am I going to have to be on this painful journey about talking about stuff and, pulling this thing out of this box, and then it leads to another box where I've stored more trauma. And I finally just stopped thinking that way, because I knew that was actually being hard on myself. And I said, okay, what's the logical approach here? So I stopped beating myself up and stopped having this unrealistic expectation of myself that I'm going to be fixed in a year or 6 months or 2 months or whatever the case is. And I thought, you know what, if I've gone through this career for 14 years and it took me that long to become that unwell, could I logically say it's going to take me at least 14 years to come back out of that spot to find health and all of the beautiful things that I want? And I just, in that moment, said, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And I finally stopped looking at this as like a sprint and just started to recognize that I needed to slow down and really focus on my own healing journey, but also give myself grace, because it was going to take time. It was going to take years to unravel this whole spider web of trauma and even childhood trauma. We haven't even really touched on that, but so many of us go through that too, right? So sure, you assume trauma as a police officer, but so many of us also have trauma that goes back to childhood, and we have to walk through that as well.
Absolutely.
So you could have 30, 40 years of stuff that you have to process that you've never sat with and processed. And how do you do that? How do you teach yourself how to do that? How do you walk through this? How do you relearn how to feel and, go through some of these more difficult things that are traumatic experiences, yes, but emotions woven into those traumatic experiences. And that's where we have to learn grace. We have to learn grace for ourselves to slow down and to acknowledge that this journey is very slow and it's very frustrating, and we have to pace ourselves and move a lot slower than we want. But that's where the healing happens. And I did find that very much so, Larry, that I was very frustrated and I was very kind of, ambitious to be done with this very quickly. And it's not a quick process at all. And when you finally allow yourself to slow down just a smidge and enjoy the journey of healing, you really do finally allow yourselves to pick up and feel and process those harder things that we've been storing for years.
I mean, that makes perfect sense, because the reality is as well, how many people are guilty of doing, the fad diet or the quick pill when it's taken you 2 years to gain the weight and you expect to have it gone in 2 months? I mean, it's just not a reality. And maybe that's what you need to do as well, is give yourself that state of grace and realize, hey, it's going to take time and it's okay. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in a moment to talk about Nathan's life now and his journey away from those demons to the 1033 podcast.
This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it, to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone.
Also, check out Willow Tree Farm, care of Jason Subkowich, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who frequently updates his Instagram to share his story. You can follow him at jason.subkowich. That's Jason.Sierra Oscar Bravo Kilo Oscar Whiskey India Charlie Zulu.
And we're back from the break, still with Nathan Kapler of the 1033 podcast and a retired RCMP member. Nathan, it's funny because I don't take it as an ego thing at all, but it's a reality that, yes, sir, you are definitely at a better point of realization with regards to the path than I, primarily because, when I stepped back in the first week of December, I expected that I'd have everything back together and ready to go again within a few weeks, maybe a month or two at most. And here we are now into June. And the last report by my psychologist is, no way, you're not ready to go back yet, buddy. So it does take quite a bit to learn the grace about which you speak.
It's incredibly hard to give ourselves grace. And I think the reason for me as to why it took so long to give myself grace is one, for most of my life, my childhood, and going through some things through childhood, and also becoming a Mountie, I was so focused on serving others that I forgot how to serve myself. And I think as men, now we're blending into a place of, male leadership. And what does that look like? I grew up in northern Alberta, so I would say that, the leaders in the community that really kind of showed us, how to be men or how to be vulnerable and feel emotion, but communicate it, that was just never there. So going back to, the late 80s when I was born, so much has changed from then till now where, men are, I think, taught better in better ways how to, feel emotion and to recognize what it is and to have those males in their lives that are showing them this is what it means to be a man. It's very normal to go through sadness. It's very normal to go through anger. It's very normal to go through all of these different emotions. And it's something that I kind of celebrate with my boys because I have to show them this. I have to make sure that they're aware of it. that emotional intelligence is something that really needs to be showcased to men and young boys at a very young age. So yeah, this whole journey has been not only a challenge of PTSD from policing, but really challenging myself on the past teachings I had as a child, and what do I need as a man now to fully grow beyond PTSD and really kind of get myself into a place where I'm happy with where I'm at in life. And it takes us so much time to learn how to give ourselves grace and to, give yourself that self-compassion that you deserve, because you haven't been taught these tools or these tricks on how to deal with, trauma. And we're incredibly hard on ourselves, Larry.
Absolutely.
Incredibly hard on ourselves. And we need to stop that shit. Like, we really do. Especially as cops, we carry so much guilt about the things that we've been through, and we hold ourselves to such a high standard, which is, yes, it's the name of the game of being a police officer, but we also got to give ourselves some grace too. And I think for me, I'm doing better at that now, and it's allowed myself to really kind of heal in ways that I didn't expect. And it's shown me that, there's other ways I tapped into PTSD growth, yes, but giving myself grace was in a very important part of my journey into reestablishing this new foundation of, okay, I got really messed up with PTSD and mental health, but I'm not going to allow myself to stay there. What am I going to do to recreate myself so I can come out of the ashes and I can be a better version of myself? Because just because I went down with this does not mean I get to stay there.
No one will ever beat the shit out of me more than I beat the shit out of myself, Nathan. And that's the reality. And that's almost in a completely ludicrous way allows me to maintain control, oddly enough. But it does give me that sense that you can't hurt me any more than I can hurt myself. So whatever you say is not going to bother me. Whatever you think is not going to bother me. And it is a problem. And I concur with you 100% that that's something we need to step away from, because if you can't love yourself, it becomes very difficult for others to be able to see that in you, for you to be able to love others. And that's part of the journey, part of the change that I have been striving to make. And it's important that anyone and everyone listening to this realizes the same thing. Nathan, when you speak back about some of the old school mentalities with regards to masculinity, do you think, and I don't mean just the RCMP, but I mean in almost any organization really, do you think the remnants of those that are still there, still present, especially in higher management positions, do you think that's impeding people coming out and talking now about their problems? Do you think that's still creating an issue?
I do. And I mean, we've got to be very careful about how we approach this, because we don't want to just paint everyone with the same brush. But what I do know, if we kind of dial this back and speak about this less on an emotional level, we'll do that more in a bit here when I give the answer, and talk more about this just from a logical standpoint, from the journey of myself doing this podcast and connecting with so many different people across so many different agencies. And I'm sure you've heard this statistic as well too, Larry. Right now, the RCMP is facing about 50% of their membership is facing a significant mental health challenge, i.e. PTSD or depression or major depressive episodes, anxiety, the whole range of things that eventually just bleed into PTSD. I think the munis are a little bit less. There might be around 45%, somewhere in there. But if you take a police force that's 20,000 strong across Canada, coast to coast, if 50% of your workforce right now is diagnosed and struggling, that means 1 in every 2 has something going on. That stat is alarming. Now, what we're not talking about is, what is that other 50% of that group? What are they doing? Are they staying well? Are they resilient? Are they going to get to the finish line completely unfazed and impacted? And I have long learned that with mental health, whatever you assume you know about it, you know nothing about it. So I've always learned that I don't try to approach mental health with any kind of bias or any kind of state of denial or claiming to know what I know is going to be the truth and how it is. But at the same time, I also look at, could you raise the argument that the other 50% are that group of people that are 0 to 10 years of service, and they're slowly making their way along the journey to get to a point where they too will be diagnosed with PTSD. I honestly think that because of the shame and guilt that exists from going through this in my own personal experience, that so many of them are still hiding. And I think it's evident in our numbers in suicide. I think it's evident in our numbers of substance abuse, all of the relationship issues that happen, the higher divorce rates. I actually believe, and this isn't confirmed, so it's just a belief or I guess a suspicion, that I would think that probably that number that is diagnosed will eventually be higher down the road, where I would say that everyone is impacted by this career. So I would think that we will probably at some point will maybe one day acknowledge that maybe 100% of our workforce goes through something significant over the span of your career. And there's no shame in that, because it's not a point that I use to, cause fear or really shake the tree. But it's with mental health, I've learned that we have to really be open to the fact that you cannot tell yourself going into policing that it's not going to impact you. And the day that you walk into it saying and recognizing that it will impact you, you'll actually start to do the right things along the way to keep yourself healthy. Because my approach originally to this was that I'm going to walk into policing and claim that I'm never going to be impacted, that my mental health is so strong that this job will never break me. And it absolutely broke me.
Yeah. I guess the other side of it, Nathan, as well, is I have no problem saying that, I was born in the early 70s. I'm 50 years old. I could easily be one of those old school mentalities in terms of masculinity. And there was quite a while that, again, when I thought about my own mental experiences, my own traumas that were experienced, I too just accepted, well, yeah, man, this job is going to fuck you up. So we're all fucked up. Everyone, all of us are. We all are. We just don't talk about it. We just don't deal with it. You just don't. The end. And so I remember hearing people, 10 years ago that were finally starting to take some time off. And what killed me was when you would hear, phrases like ODM, off duty mad, or shit like that, especially to get to a point where I am now when I go, these members are not taking time for vacation or because they just want a break. They've gotten to the point that they're well beyond needing a break. And those are some of the changes that need to come down the road. You can instill all kinds of different training sessions and all kinds of resources, but they really need to be bought in by everyone. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I really do. And just to go back to and dovetail back to the original question you asked me, is this something that impacts our upper management, and is this something that's impacting all of us? I wholeheartedly agree. It is. I've had a few, and I'm going to have another white shirt on, a commissioned officer who's going to open up and talk about his own experiences. They go through this as well. We all do. No one leaves this journey unscathed and untouched. It's just, what are you willing to admit? And what are you willing to admit in the hopes of hopefully helping, our organization and our men and women who are on the bottom, who are going through this right now. And we really need to shift this.
Yeah, I concur. I believe they have too, Nathan. There's no doubt in my mind that they have as well. It doesn't matter what color your shirt is. If you've been through the shit, you've been through the shit, and it leaves some scars. That's the reality. And I believe that they're there. I think the unfortunate thing is that, again, when it comes into that old school mentality with regards to masculinity, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I think those thoughts, those concepts is what's preventing some of the older generation, the older members who can be in upper management from actually feeling comfortable enough to be able to deal with the issues. And so to go back to a position of myself where I know I was dealing with rage, bouts of rage, like just angry, very stressed, very hypervigilant, very, overstimulated. I was angry, very angry. And I look back now again and sort of go, well, obviously that was the problem. And it brought things in a clear light with regards to others who are, again, old school, maybe, that people who are in the higher ranks, and I mean, I'm a sergeant, so it goes certainly from my rank too. As you had mentioned earlier, the issue that you had with a sergeant, but it's about members of rank, and the higher the rank, the more important I actually see that these members need to move beyond the old concepts that they had, that this is nothing, they will get through it, they're not affected by it, or if they are, they just man up, they deal with it. And I say that they need to get beyond it because one of the biggest reasons I stepped back when I did was because I wanted to show my team that a member with over 20 years service in the rank of sergeant that's doing, I have no issue saying I was doing great work, can also go, I need to take a break. And I just really believe that's important. And every organization, I don't just mean the RCMP, I mean the OPP. I mean fire departments across the country. I mean paramedic services across the country. Anyone that has any sort of a management structure, when you get those old school thoughts, there needs to be more change there, Nathan, as opposed to kind of the concept or the ideology that, well, they'll be gone soon. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. There's still a lot of that there. And it means something when someone of a rank, again, like the commissioned officers you've had on the show, that are actually vulnerable enough and, more importantly, courageous enough to come out and have these conversations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The culture that is, makes up policing right now, obviously, they're trying to shift it and they're trying to get more education in front of the members, it's great. But there really does need to be a bigger, more deeper shift into a culture of compassion and care and vulnerability and showing people, what does it look like to be vulnerable as men in the workplace or as females in the workplace. And I see some of those people stepping forward and finally doing it, but it's the people that are, they're going through and they're recognizing how to do this differently from their own experience. I don't think that leadership right now in police organizations is there yet where they can foster that cultural change. I hope in time they do get to that place. And I think the reason I stumbled on this was actually somebody posed this question years ago to me when I started talking. They said they had this feeling or this belief that all cops were dirty, right? They were unethical, they were all unjust, and they were just horrible human beings. And we had a conversation about this, and I thought, you know what, why do you feel this way? And they said, well, we're always seeing in the news that, most police officers are stealing evidence, or they're doing something inappropriate, or they're using force in a way where it's excessive. And I thought, you know what, why is this happening? We had a deeper conversation about this. And the only thing that I could come up with is that maybe, just maybe, our police force is suffering so significantly with their mental health across the board that most of them have gotten to a place where they no longer can have compassion or care or any kind of connection into, what does it look like to be a leader at the same time as also care for your flock while you're in the profession. You look at people that are going through some of these significant issues down south where excessive use of force is happening. What kind of human does that? Well, it's definitely going to be someone that's facing compassion burnout, right? Where they no longer have that ability to assess where they're at in the use of force that they're doing that might actually lead to someone's death, right? So I think for the most part, all that cops that get in by today for this profession, Larry, and I'm sure you can agree with this, are amazing people. They come in, they're so compassionate, caring, they're there for all the right reasons. They have this massive heart. They want to really do well and serve their country. And then somewhere along the way, they just get burnt out with mental health or post-traumatic stress issues. And now they're trying to navigate this, all while also trying to navigate a career and life and family and grow in their career and get promoted and all of these different things that we all kind of admire or kind of try to get to, right? But you're right. I think this is a very deeply rooted mental health issue that impacts us in so many ways. It impacts our personal journey. It impacts our ability to lead the organization and, more importantly, shift the cultural change that needs to happen.
And when you talk about the deep roots of this mental health issue, we have to go into the 1033 podcast, Nathan. And I know you're not necessarily a man who likes to boast. However, the podcast has been around for a bit now, and it's obviously had some huge impacts. I'm not sure if you had the opportunity. I have begun reading an advanced reader's copy of Mark Bouchard's book, who is an RCMP member. And Mark will be on the show in a little while. And it's a beautiful thing, Nathan, when I'm reading the book and I see the name Nathan Kapler and the 1033 podcast actually spoken to in terms of some things that help. That's got to give you some pride. Tell people about the podcast and, I guess, what you're doing with it, what you've seen come out of it, and where you see it going.
Yeah, no, thanks for acknowledging that. The one thing I feared most in this journey was coming out and being able to talk about my journey and to express this level of vulnerability that, this is what my journey looked like. And the very thing that I feared most, once I was able to, get through that fear and just show up and tell my story and how PTSD and policing had impacted me, it brought me so much closer to people. And my connection now with those around me is so much deeper and so much more authentic. So it's opened doors that I never even believed could be possible. I'm connected to, Mark Bouchard, amazing cop who's writing a book right now on trauma in his own journey. And he's trying to, help make that cultural change happen from the inside of the policing organization while he still is a cop. An amazing soul. And to see, some of the things that I've gained just through life experience, through talking to others and learning, these things are all being echoed in certain other areas now, which is amazing. And I don't like to boast, and it's never been about that because my heart's just here to make sure we take care of people. It's really cool to see that, some of this passion outside of policing has now started to shift into helping hopefully some of that cultural change happen through whether this is a grassroots movement or not, I'll never know. But at least fostering a safe place for our people to come and open up and talk to. It's at least giving back to them so that we can at least arm, the next generation of police officers and first responders with more knowledge than we had so that they can stay well on their journey. Because nobody needs to or deserves to go to the place that you or I hit in this journey with post-traumatic stress. And if we can help people to stay well and to stay away from contemplating suicide or having these monumental breakdowns in life, we've done our work. And that's all I care about. So I'm so proud to see not only my work kind of start to work out into the world, but to see others step forward too and feel like they can make change as well. So it's really cool to see all of this take place.
Is there anything else, did you want to add before we end off on the show today? Anything you'd like to say? The floor is completely yours, brother.
What I try to do on my end is I put people on the spot and I say, what is your one message of hope? Because evidently someone is going to listen to this episode and they are going to be the one that is in the fire. They're in the pit. They're walking through the coals right now and they can't see, 2 steps ahead of them. They don't even know how to take that next step, but they're in so much pain and so much suffering because of these experiences that they've gone through and the trauma. And my message of hope, even when, that person is in that space, probably most likely won't be able to hear that message of hope and really kind of be able to let it be used as a lighthouse or a beacon to move forward. But you have to be kind to yourself. You have to somehow just try to hold grace for yourself and know that you're not alone. And that is one of the things we always hear with PTSD is you're not alone. And it can be actually quite lonely to hear that statement because a lot of times we don't know how to connect with people to share where we are. But you will be able to get through this hard chapter in your life. And you will be able to grow and you will be able to move beyond the PTSD. You may always have it, but you'll be able to get to a point where your symptoms are so diminished that you've actually become a better version of yourself. And you're going to thank yourself for all the hard work you've put into exploring what does this look like for you. So give yourself that grace and that compassion that you deserve, because you've served your country and you've done some hard stuff and seen some horrible things. So be gentle to yourself.
And you'll experience the post-traumatic growth that I truly believe, Nathan, you have experienced, that I truly believe that I have experienced and am. And there's still lots of room for that growth. And it is a beautiful thing. The only way you ever have the opportunity to experience this is to make sure that you don't ever extinguish your own light. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please also have mine.
Don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.